about Chet Austin.
Yeah.
And it had to be gunslinger kind of days back then.
It was.
Yeah. So I was at a park. I was at a Braves, I think it was the Battery, and I overheard these people talking about how in the world did Cobb County get to the point that you could land a SunTrust Park. And I wish somebody would tell that story. And that's when we started about a year ago. Ty and I started working on this concept. And what we want you to talk about is what happened and who were the players back in time, 40 years, 35 years, whatever. Who were the players that made this community change so that we could be who we are today? John talked about the fact there were probably only 5 Republicans in Cobb County early in the politics business.
If that many.
But we'll talk to your finish. So the question would be, talk a little bit about the godfathers of Cobb County 30, 40 years ago that are responsible for who we are as a community today. Who made the big decisions? What were some of the big decisions?
Well, Ernest Barrett was without question the powerful feature of the 1960s that made everything in Cobb County that's happened at the end of the last century and the first of this century happen. Ernest Barrett was chairman of the county commission. Cobb County was the 3rd largest county in the state, but it was about 170,000 people at that time, not almost a million. And Ernest Barrett, people started coming to Cobb, building houses, moving, businesses started coming, but it was slow. And Ernest Barrett said, if we're ever going to be what we want to be, we've got to build the infrastructure to meet the next jobs of the future, not the old jobs of the past. And so he went to the commissioners and sold them on passing a bond issue on a countywide water system and a countywide sewer system. And it passed. Cobb County put a 36-inch water main in a big circle all the way around the county, the outer perimeters of the county, and made water accessible to every acre of ground in Cobb County, and then it required dry sewer to be installed in every subdivision that was developed. Dry sewer meaning the sewer was in, but it didn't work. You had to get the last mile of affluence to get it there to work. And so builders and developers started including sewer in their cost and in their plans. So all of a sudden you had water available, you had sewer available to everybody. Builders had a reason to come because both those key utilities are there. And people knew what the future was going to look like and not what it was going to not be, but what it was going to be. So, but Ernest Barrett, he was a driving force. He took Cobb County to New York City, sold Standard & Poor's and those guys on Cobb County's financial reliability. Took our rate, got us rated in bond rating. We had a AAA bond rating, so our interest rate we got on bonds that we sold was low as you could get at the time. And it was just this absolute perfect time. The big recession in housing came in 1974. They did this in 1971. So they did it pre-recession, so they got the advantage of all the growth that had taken place up to then, and then they became the foundation for growth that took place after then. So there's no question Ernest Barrett is the #1 champion of the county over the long period of time, the last 75 years. And no question the countywide water system and the countywide sewer system was the infrastructure that made it happen.
Well, that's one of the things we try to, there are forks in the road as leaders. And one fork takes you one place good, and if you take the other one, you go bad. DeKalb County dealt with those forks in the road. Beyond the sewer system that Ernest Barrett built, what were some other major decisions that had to be made where if we made the right one, we'd be where we are today? If we'd done something wrong or gone down a different pathway, we would not be who we are today?
Well, you're not going to believe this, but I-75 was an issue back then. I-75 was finished from Sault Ste. Marie to north of Kennesaw College and from south of Kennesaw College to Miami, Florida. There's about a 30-mile gap that went through Cobb County that wasn't finished, and there were 3 or 4 alternative property lines that the state wanted to buy the right of way to finish it. And Harold Willingham owned some of the land, and other people, Herman Talmadge owned some of the land, some politicians owned some of it, very wealthy developers owned some of it. And obviously, if you were going to be the last 30 miles of 75, from Sault Ste. Marie, Canada to Miami Beach, Florida, you had a heck of a valuable piece of property. So although they were fighting the road being built by not wanting the traffic in their backyard, and secretly they were trying to get it built in their backyard because they wanted the traffic for the value of the property. And finally, Cobb County and the state DOT picked the route that we've got now, which is where I-75 currently goes through the county, but that decision didn't come until the late 1960s and early 1970s. Picturing Cobb County without I-75 is something you can't really do, but there was no I-75 until the end of the decade of the 70s. And no question that Harold Willingham, as a elected official and Speaker of the House of Representatives in Georgia at his date when he was elected to those things, and Ernest Barrett as the chairman of the county commission, and Chet Austin as a formidable businessman in our county, and other people that had vested interests, Joe Mack Wilson, and all came together and finally finished I-75. And when they did, it opened the day. When they put that together, and it was just a phenomenal day of success for our county.
We interviewed Mac Henderson. What was Mac's role in this community where he made a difference?
Every community has a personality and a person that's indispensable, not because of who they are or what they are, but because of what they're willing to be to the county. And Mac was the guy that came in and took the Chamber of Commerce over for a while, then had a heart attack. John Williams came back and chaired it for a while, and then Mac got better, and he came back, became the county manager of the county. Mac was the guy that led Bell South, which was one of the leading businesses in the county. Still is a great influence in the county. And Mac was a very committed, dedicated person to doing what was right and not willing to stand up and say what was right. And he was the guy that pulled the Bob Prillamans of the world and folks like that together to be formidable voices in our county. But Mac Henderson is the guy you would pick. If somebody said who would you pick to be most like your father, it's the guy you'd pick. Who would you pick to be most trustworthy person you know? Mac's the person you'd pick. He was just a guiding hand and a solid rock for our county. We
have encouraged people we've interviewed not to be modest. This is not the time to be modest. What was Johnny Isakson's role? And a little bit about people you interfaced. What motivated you to get engaged in politics and business and to move Cobb County forward?
Well, I got involved in politics, I guess, because I always had an interest in politics. I didn't grow up saying I want to be president or governor or state representative or anything else. I liked it. I liked the process. And I knew in real estate that if you don't make something happen, and it isn't going to happen. And so I knew I had to get out of there and become a part of the county. I was born in Brookhaven, so I wasn't a Cobb County boy by birth. And I knew to get involved and work as hard as you can, you had to make something out of yourself and the community, and you had to earn your way. And so I joined the Chamber of Commerce in 1970, opened the first office of our company in Cobb County in 1969, built our Marietta office in 1972. My wife, all our children were born in Cobb County. My wife and I raised our families in East Cobb, and just built on the legacy of being a part of the community and trying to make a difference for the community. And as always is true, those who reap the most don't get it because they went in there to get it. They did it because they earned it. People will follow you anywhere if you're a dreamer and somebody who's willing to help the community come together. So I was glad to be a volunteer in an army of thousands, and there was literally an army of thousands. Otis Brumby, just where else in the world as the editor and owner of the daily newspaper for the county and 33 other dailies for all the counties that surround it. Where in the world do you find that person who's also involved in the Chamber of Commerce, who's also friends with all the members of the legislative delegation, who knows each member of Congress, who himself was a page in the United States Senate years ago? Where else do you find that but in Cobb County? You got what Otis Brumby did and what he did with that newspaper and what he did as a citizen being involved in the, and he took us all on. Listen, if he thought I was wrong, he'd tell me I was wrong, and it'd be right on the front page of the paper. He wouldn't hide it on the comic section. But if he thought you were right, he'd go to the mat fighting for you. And he had a big newspaper with a big club south of him called the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But they didn't scare him. And he scared them because they knew what he had. He had a newspaper that was colloquial, positive, appeal to families. You print them by the thousands, give them away rather than have people subscribe to them. Put the kid's picture in when he got his Cub Scout uniform, put him in when he graduated from high school, put him in when he went to college, put him in when he got married. So the newspaper became a part of the family history. Cobb County had that. It had a commissioner like Ernest Barrett, who for years was the steady rock in leadership, and just on and on we had those people we built the success of the county on. And I learned, my father taught me, he said, Johnny, if you want to learn how to be successful, watch people who are successful and see how they do it. Carl Harrison told me when I got elected to the state senate, he said, state legislature, he said, I don't want you to say a damn thing the first year you're down here. So you keep your mouth shut and your ears open. And after you've been here a year and you've seen who's successful and how they got successful and what they did, then you emulate what they did and you'll be fine. But don't come in here with your mouth open and your ears shut, because you don't learn a thing with your mouth open. And so I did that and tried to be a good observer and tried to copy people who did things right and tried to make sure I didn't do things that people did things wrong.
It's often said every good man has a good woman behind him. Your wife's been a supportive wife. Talk about the wife of somebody that's engaged in improving the community when people are going to throw rocks at them. You're going to be out at night doing events, et cetera, et cetera. Talk about the role Diane played in your life.
Well, every spouse of every elected official, particularly the county level, and to a lesser extent the state level, it's a tough job. I mean, you know, the people only have to lean over the back fence to cuss you out if you're a county official. If you go to Washington, they got to all to Washington and get your call long distance, and both those are harder to do. So and people don't tend to say thank you very much anyway because they expect it, but people will give you hell if they didn't like it and didn't like what you gave to them or did for them. So my wife, I could not, she was the rock I depended on for keeping my ego from getting out of hand, and she did that early and did it well and did all our career. She supported me when she knew I was doing something I wanted to do and needed to do, and she helped do those things that I couldn't do, that probably I should have done as the father at the time. But she was just a good, steady force. I think she thinks politics is probably the single dumbest profession to be in, but she married into it, and she never did anything but support me 100% and allow me to do the things that I did by taking up whatever slack I created in the family. I could never have done it without her.
We hired a guy when I was chamber chair, a project called Cobb Roadmap, which was to try to understand how we got here. Otis White was hired to interview 50 people in the community. When he finished all those interviews, he said there's something that makes Cobb County special that I've never seen in another city around the country or county. Cobb County has a way of making decisions involving the right people. He said it's the Cobb way of doing things. I've never seen it before. People fight in public, they fight in front of the media. Cobb gets the right people together, they make decisions, things get implemented, and the noise stays down. Talk about that issue from your perspective. How are major decisions made in this county?
Major decisions are made when the leadership of the county, which may be elected and may not be elected, comes together and decides something's got to be done. And it used to be done over Campbell's Restaurant in Smyrna on South Cobb Drive, or the Cupboard in Marietta. The old meat and threes are all gone now. So you go to Starbucks on the corner or whatever else you ought to go to, but they sit around and have a cup of coffee and talk about those things to make them happen. And then if you get a Bob Prilliman and a Mac Henderson and a John Williams, and you get other key leaders in the county say, you know, something ought to be done about X, Y, or Z, then everybody sits down and tries to find that way to get what that special thing is done. I'll never forget when our county almost imploded because of the battle between the Cobb school system and the Marietta school system over annexation by the city of Marietta and the unincorporated area of Cobb. I mean, there were signs put up, there were signs burned in yards, there were things said about folks you wouldn't think nice people would say or ugly people would say for that matter. It got dirty as it could be, and it affected the biggest businesses in our county. People like Ed Voiles Oldsmobile, which at the time was probably the biggest automobile in the southeastern United States, and other folks like that. The Marietta Journal got involved in it. And it was all because the Marietta schools were getting funds from the Board of Lights and Water, which is the electric utility of the city, and the county wasn't. The county system wasn't. So the county system at Cobb was at the 20 mil limit in terms of taxation. The Marietta school system had an alternative way of financing other than the property tax. So it was easy to join Marietta and have a lower tax bill. It was a perfect situation for the city. But it was bad for the county and the community, and it skewed growth, it skewed relationships, and it really was bad all the way around. a lot of folks in Marietta and Smyrna and Cobb County got together, from the superintendent of schools to former chairman of the board of commissioners, former chairman of the board of education, and others, and bit the bullet and did some hard things. In fact, what we did, just to make it quick, we raised $21,000 for a group we named Leadership Cobb. And that was just the name we gave. We had to have a name for it. And we hired the University of Georgia's Institute of Government to come in and analyze our 6 cities and county, the way our tax money was split and earned, the way our school systems were financed and funded, and see if there's any place in the country that had a problem like that, and if there was, how they solved it. Well, there wasn't any place in the country that had a problem like that, and if it had been, it couldn't have gotten solved. We were first in both categories. So finally, by focusing, raising private money, taxpayers paying money to study what the governments were doing, coming up with a game plan to stop it and reduce the tension in the county, we put together a program called Leadership Cobb that over time worked to where there was an understanding between Cobb and Marietta as to who could annex what and when and how much and everything else. Now, we weren't going to have a range war in the county. Zoning started taking place, development started coming back, businesses invested more money, like Ed Voiles, who built automobile dealerships up and down US 41. And the problem got solved. But it got solved because people sat around those three breakfast places, had coffee, talked about the problem, hired the University of Georgia to come in and give us some expertise, put the program together, and then said to everybody, okay, we want to be united, we want to be successful, we want to be the place to live, but we're never going to get there if we don't solve this problem, and then made our mind to solve it, and we did.
That's great stuff.
Yeah.
Those are stories, and we like a lot of those. We'll keep going. We've got some time. The next question is going to be, and it's really interesting when you track it, the role John Williams played in the development of Cobb County. I've heard stories about John. John, in our interview, talked about how he got the chamber building funded, for example. And he's, full of stories. Roy Barnes, we interviewed him, had tons of stories. But you're a great storyteller, too. Talk about John Williams and any memories you have of him that stand out.
Well, John's just was one of the best friends I ever had in life, and we miss him in his passing, and he will always be missed in Cobb County. And he was one of those guys, the epitaph, I think, on Robert Woodruff's grave is, there's no limit to what a man can do if he doesn't want to take credit for it. John Williams lived that epitaph. He did things and never took credit for that would be too long to mention in this interview. He did it because he didn't want the credit. He wanted the achievement for the county or for the city, or for what, if it was the arts, the Cobb Energy Center. If it was sports, it was a new Cobb Civic Center. Whatever it might be, John would be a leader in it, or he would recruit people to come in and lead it. John had a way of asking you to lunch and saying, "Now I'm buying." And when you left, the buying was done by you because he had something he wanted you to do and you agreed to do it. He bought the cheap part, that was the food. And a lot of things happened. We United for Kids, I was going through some old paperwork at home not too long ago, and you were helpful in this yourself, David. We had an organization called United for Cobb, United for Kids. We'd passed a SPLOST referendum, had failed to pass a SPLOST referendum in the county for school construction, and that was going to take our #1 in the state school system and bury it as an afterthought around the country. So John Williams and myself and Kessel Stelling and a lot of good people in our county, bankers and lawyers and everybody's got a vested interest in the school system doing well, which, by the way, is the way you lead. Leaders go explain to people why it's good for them for something to happen. You always sell a benefit. Don't sell a liability or a risk. So we went out and sold people on the fact we need to pass this 1 penny increase in sales tax to raise the money necessary to build the classrooms of the 21st century on time, for cash, and on schedule. And we passed it, and we did so. John picked the people to kind of be the United for Kids workers. He's got the right people in marketing to come up with the right slogans and the right signs. And then he did the right things in the Chamber of Commerce and the other business influences that we had to spread the word. And we took what had been a losing referendum by something like 60-40 the last time we took it to a winning referendum at something almost 60-40, reversing it the other way. And it was sheer the talent and the ability of John to coalesce the personalities and the people and the and the money behind the effort to see to it that it happened. John was just one of those people. He was a doer. He's a doer, but he's a dreamer. John's, they used to talk about well, not Teddy, but Robert Kennedy when he was in Biafra when the starvation was going on in Biafra, in Africa. And when he left on the trip, somebody said, well, what do you see here? He said, you know, some people look around and see what's here and say why. He said, I look around and see what's not here and say why not. And I want to come back and bring the food and the water and the electricity and things necessary for these people. John always saw the dream. He always had the vision. And he could sell it because he could describe it. And he never asked anybody to do anything for the dream that he had not already done himself. I'm not going to mention any names in this because I don't want to do it, but the best example I can tell you is if you had a fundraising program going and you were short of your goal and it was an important fundraiser, you'd have one of those calls to come to lunch or go to the Waffle House or go to the IHOP, and you knew you took two things. One is a sharp mind and the other is a checkbook. And John would say, you know, we're $250,000 short of doing X, Y, and Z. We've run out every lead we've got. We got to do it now or it's not going to get done. And we can't let each other down. Here's my check for $50,000. I want checks from all you guys and make y'all you can go write the check or go raise it. I don't care which one you do. I mean, it wasn't a question as whether or not you can get $50,000. It was a question of whether it was your money or somebody else's. That's the way John did things. I mean, he first of all, he gave the money first. He didn't ask you for a dime. He had already put in. And you know, a lot of people say, well, they named a ballroom after him at the Galleria, and at the Civic Center, the Cobb Energy Center. Let me tell you something. John Wayne never wanted anything named after him. All those things were forced on him because the community just said, John, we can't let this go by without recognizing you and Nancy and the best way we can for what you've done for the county. So we named a few things after him, but not nearly as many things as we would have if it had been a normal community where everything in the county, like in Alabama, everything is Richard Shelby this or Richard Shelby that because he got a grant from the government, brought it down, and they spent it and built something. Everything that's in Cobb County is there because John Williams had a vision and knew the people to get it done and brought people together and got it done and never had to ask people to put their money into something he hadn't already put in the same amount himself. So he was a visionary, he was a leader, he led by example, great guy.
One of the steps that was taken to make Cobb County who it is today and actually a leader was the formation of the first CID in the state of Georgia, a vehicle for raising money for infrastructure, where people pay taxes voluntarily. There are a lot of stories about how all that took place. I'd be very interested in your recollection of how all that happened.
Well, Roy Barnes was the state senator from Cobb County, and was Joe Frank Harris, his governor's floor leader, was the governor, and Roy was his floor leader. I was the elected minority leader of the Georgia House of Representatives, which meant I was the highest ranking Republican in the body that didn't have many Republicans to start with. But John Williams is going to be in every story I think I will come up with because he's been such a key part. But John knew Roy and knew myself, and we were trying to do some things the county governments and everybody was all of a sudden levying development fees and fees on zoning and stuff to raise more money to be able to fund the stuff they need to fund for developers. And so developers got tired of just having the pocket picked on development fees and things like that. On the same token, there was no real mechanism to get the developer to put into the county in a meaningful way. So Roy and I was in real estate and had a brokerage company, the largest in the state. And John was the most successful apartment builder, one of the most successful ones in the country, but certainly the most successful in Metro Atlanta. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And Roy was a lawyer who was an expert in zoning law and stuff like that. And everybody came up with the idea, why don't we figure a way for the people in these areas to tax themselves to raise the money to put in the improvements they need to meet the demands that are brought about by the development, like water and sewer and roads. And making a long story short, we did so. Put together something called community improvement districts, CIDs. we passed a constitutional amendment in the legislature that went before the voters that end of that year in 1983, I believe, or right around there. That just authorized the state to develop a CID system. It had to have 75% participation by residents in the designated area. They had to be residential residents, not commercial. 75%. You had to levy. You could levy taxes on yourself, but only up to 5%. There's a 5 mil tax increase at the most, and it had to have a sunset in it, so the voters came back every few years and voted on the millage increase. Everybody said, that's a pretty good idea. You limit the tax at 5%, 5 mils. The people get to vote on it. When it sunsets, they got to come back and vote again for you to pass it. You have to delineate where it's going to go. It was just a great idea that was unheard of in development anywhere in the country. We passed that in Georgia, and passed it for a lot of reasons. Joe Mack Wilson was one reason, who was the mayor of Marietta, who was an old wool hat. By God, Republicans are terrible and Democrats ought to run the world, but he knew Roy and I had put together a program that ought to happen. He later became the mayor of Marietta and used the program for a lot of purposes. We had a lot of other people who helped on it. We passed that thing, and lots of interesting things happened. One just good example is the intersection of I-75 and I-285, which is one of the most complex integrated interstate highway system interchanges in the country. It was designed to solve a problem. We had 3 interstates coming together within a quarter mile of each other, and we had to develop a way that all the residents on the surface roads in the neighborhood didn't have to get on the interstate to get over to the other side of the neighborhood. That's what was called all the traffic jams. We had all this local traffic getting on the interstate highway, was hoping to go 80 miles an hour. They wasn't going anywhere. Designed the Kennedy interchange, named after the owners of the property. Spent $175 million on what just is the most beautiful interchange you ever saw. It's landscape, now it's part of the Community Improvement District, which is what CID stands for. Landscaped, it's the prettiest thing you ever saw. It's an idea that was going down the drain until the people in Cobb County said, well, we'll pay 5 mils. The developer said, we'll pay 5 mils. The county said, if we can get people to come up with 5 mils, we'll find a way to match it with our county money. And one thing after another, the state would put money in. And pretty soon, the major developments of regional impact, DRIPs, developments of regional impact, became known in the zoning world as what was determined by that particular piece of action, because they were so big and so consequential. They had a major impact, but the major impact was always positive. It was always cooperatively participated in, and also funded by a combination of the people who were benefited as well as the people who were going to use it. It was just a home run all the way around.
Do you think it had anything to do with the Cobb success?
I do. I mean, if I had to, real quickly, the water system that Ernest Barrett did and the sewer system was number one. Kermit Keenum and the Cobb County school system, he was the school superintendent at the time in the 1970s. He took a floundering urban, rural / school system and made it the shining star in the state under his sheer leadership. And Cobb County was that system, the Cobb County system, that system. So Kermit Keenum on the Cobb County school system, Ernest Barrett on the water system. Then we always had mayors like Joe Mack Wilson, who I mentioned, but there are other, Max Bacon, who was mayor forever in Smyrna. His daddy was mayor before he was. Great people who at the local level participated in making the county great. That was all important. And then we had civic leaders, Mac Henderson, people you could go down and list and name over, like hundreds of them anyway, that gave to the county and gave leadership to the county, led the civic groups in the county, the Rotary clubs, the Kiwanis clubs, everything else, that took the county to new heights. And then we had a lot of people get elected in leadership positions that could really bring some big dollars to the table. Roy Barnes, who was governor of Georgia for 4 years, and is a great friend of mine, did a phenomenal job. We had just lots of things happen like that. So we had the perfect storm. We had elected leadership, Republican and Democrat, that never succumbed to that difference. We had old experienced hands who could have said, I don't want to change, I want to be like it always was, versus dreamers like John Williams. And when dreamers and schemers get together and the county rallies behind them, there ain't nothing you can't do. And Cobb County proved that.
That's great. See how we're on time. Okay. This is a broad question that you can sort of ramble on a little bit. Any community or state or whatever has some institutions that play a big role. In Cobb, we had the media, Otis Brummy. We had a hospital system, Wellstar. And then we had the benefit of Kennesaw State University with Betty Siegel. If you could talk a little bit about how those played into who we are, particularly a little bit about Betty Siegel. They're having a recognition event for her, and I think you probably know about that in September.
Right.
Yeah. But those are three, and you mentioned Kerman, and that's obviously taking care of the K through 12 program. But for higher education, Betty Siegel took a commuter college and transformed it into a university, right?
Well, she did. Kennesaw State was in the 60s a 2,000 student, 2-year college. It gave 2-year certificates, not 4-year diplomas. And Horace Sturgis was the first president of that college. It was picked by the Board of Regents. And what happened at Kennesaw, which is now called Kennesaw State, because then it was called Kennesaw College, is emblematic of the things you and I have talked about. We had community activists get it. The people of Kennesaw got interested, took an interest, vested interest in it. Horace Sturgis did a great job in leading the school. We started getting students, and it grew a little, almost 3,000 students. And then all of a sudden one day, everybody decided, we could be a major 4-year institution of higher learning and do it and be so close to Atlanta, and we were having the problems with kids getting in college education as it was. So a lot of people in the community got together and said, we're going to make this school a 4-year school, and we're going to do it by building the demand, by getting more student applicants in there, building the program. So we developed the baseball program and the basketball program and some of the intercollegiate activities you have to. Eventually led to getting a football team for the campus. But you built all the bells and whistles that went with a college and put them in place at Kennesaw, and then you have a lady like Betty Siegel. Let me just say this. I have never known a more engaging, more exciting, more can-do person in all my life than Betty Siegel. This county has been blessed to have her. I've been blessed to know her as a friend, and she did more for this county than any individual probably I can think of, because she built a university and sold that university all over the world. When Betty Siegel made a speech on any subject, and she could make one on any subject without necessarily knowing what she was talking about, by the way, and still have everybody leave the things thinking she made a great speech. But she sold the things she was a part of, and one of them was the Kennesaw State College. She was president of the chamber one year. She did everything you can possibly think of that women normally don't do in a community. Betty did them because she was the right person to do it, and grew it to what it is today. And I want to say one other thing. Southern Polytechnic, it's got to be mentioned, that voice too. It was a stepchild of Georgia Tech for years, and then the students wanted to be separated from Georgia Tech, become a 4-year institution, which we did in the legislature. And the graduates, they don't like, Georgia Tech doesn't like this, but the graduates at Southern Tech made more money starting income than the graduates at Georgia Tech, because Southern Tech was an applied technology school. Tech's was more of a theoretical school. Tech is a great institution, and they make a lot of money, but a lot of people don't give Southern Polytechnic the attention that they deserve. So when that became a 4-year institution and ultimately merged with Kennesaw to be one institution, which it is today, it was really a cornerstone of the county's educational system and the region's educational system for big business that came here.
Keystone State, Keystone Hospital transformed into Wellstar. Any interesting stories about how that took place? Now the largest healthcare system, but you see the photos of its early days. It was a very small, sort of rough-looking hospital. How did that transform? Who was involved in it?
I'm not sure I know every one of the who's and who they are, but there's one of them called Bernie Brown's one of them. And so let me just say that nobody knew Wellstar was going to become Wellstar, except a very few people around here. Nobody knew where they were going when Keystone started growing and they started expanding that hospital. But all of a sudden we woke up one day in our county, we had a damn big hospital, a lot of doctors, a lot of innovation, a lot of things going on. And basically it's kind of like Ernest Barrett building the water system. If you build it, they will come. Well, let me tell you, when he built the water system, the developers came to build houses. When Wellstar became what it is today in its formative stages, and when Bernie Brown and that crowd brought new ideas into medicine, it took off and exploded, as did the entire medical profession. Medicine is delivered today. The practice of medicine is delivered today, and healthcare is delivered today, and totally different than it was 50 or 60 years ago. Entirely different. Not only did people change, the model changed as well. And Wellstar, quite frankly, was at the leading edge of that. A lot of great hospitals and a lot of great medical people, in Georgia, they never saw it coming. Or they saw it coming and said, that'll never happen. I can remember one of my doctors used to have a sign on his door. I belong to no PPO, HMO, or any other organized medical group. And 2 years later, his sign said, I belong to every PPO, HMO, and other organized group, because medicine just changed to health maintenance organizations, to PPOs, provider operations, and things like that. Kennestone was at the edge of that. Bernie Brown was the cornerstone of it. There were a lot of the people we've talked about that were on the board of Wellstar and before it, Kennestone, whose names we probably had. Fred Bentley, both Big Fred and Red Fred, the father and the son. And they had an awful lot to do with it. Joe McWilson had an awful lot to do with it. Bob Perelman probably more to do with it, making it everything it became than anybody else. Bernie Brown has to get some credit. He took the arrows. I mean, a lot of people didn't like what Bernie was doing, but what he did was the right thing to do for the time, and ended up prevailing. And but it'd be a great case study for somebody to write one of these days in terms of how do we get to this mess in healthcare, or how do we get out of the mess? We got out of it by beginning to follow some of the leadership that Bernie Brown brought to this county.
I got to know him pretty well. He was on the foundation board with me for a number of years. What a great guy.
Great thinker.
He's written a book. It's really interesting. We haven't talked about Otis Brumby. There are a lot of stories about John Williams and Otis, and I don't know that it's fruitful to go into them, but talk about Otis Brumby. He ran the media. Media's important at state level. It's important at the national level. Otis Brumby was a rare person. We did a thank you to him a year before he died, organized, and Conley Ingram came. You were there.
That's right.
Remember I said, how many people have been in around town? Just about everybody in that audience raised their hand. Didn't want to be in around town. Max Bacon used to always say, everybody's got to be in the barrel sometime.
That's right.
Right. So talk about the role that he played, and a lot of people give credit to the fact we don't have any political financial integrity issues because he kept an eye on people, managing people's money. So talk about Otis Brumby a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure it was the people's money or Otis's money. He kind of managed the people's money like it was Otis's money. He's the guy you wanted with the green eye shades looking over your county's operation. Otis brought a lot of people down, and every one of them probably deserved it. Going down, they didn't like it, and a lot of them fought back. But in the end, he ended up being right. Otis knew what the power of the pen had in it. He knew what the power of that newspaper was, and he used that, first of all, by starting to write about something that he had some concerns about without saying it out loud, but just saying, I'm looking. And then when they started responding, if they responded the wrong way, he started writing a little deeper into it, and they said, looking harder. And eventually people would say, well, I'm not going to let Otis run me out of business. I'm going to fight him, or they'd go somewhere else and take their marble somewhere else. Everybody that decided to fight him lost. Otis didn't start any fight to win, but he never swung his fist unless he thought he was going to win. And he was as good a friend as he and John Williams were two of my very best friends. And I miss both of them to this day. We lost Otis to prostate cancer a couple of years ago, and of course just lost John. But they both were schemers and doers and visionaries, and never short on an opinion. Different type personality. John Williams was a can-do. Anything we want to do, we can do. Otis Brumby was not so fast. Let's make sure we're not doing anything wrong. But they brought everything to the table. You look around our county today, look at the Strand Theater, and go look at who gave the money that helped build the Strand Theater. It's Otis Brumby and John Williams. You go look at the Cobb Energy Center and what Earl Smith and John Williams have done, or Kessel Stelling. Kessel Stelling's name I haven't mentioned near as much as I should. He's been a main benefactor to the county. All of them have been just great. So we've been a blessed community. I've certainly been blessed to have friends I could never have dreamed I would get to have, that I've enjoyed working with all these years.
Well, I'm planning to interview Kessel. We've got a lot of people to interview. Talk a little bit about Kessel's role in the Cobb community.
Well, Kessel, Kessel was always willing to do what nobody else wanted to do. And he was also willing to take jobs people didn't want to take. And he was also willing, when the right time came, to make the right kind of change, even though it may be tough to do. He made some money in banking. He's a good banker. He's a great family man, a great guy. Made some money at Chattahoochee and went from one bank to the next. Ended up going to First National in Cobb for a while, but ended up at Synovus with Jimmy Blanchard, where he now is the president of that bank, with one of the largest banking systems in the United States, much less the state of Georgia. He lives his motto. He gets involved in the community. You don't see Kessel in any community he's not involved in everything they're doing. By writing this check first, by volunteering to do the effort, making the physical effort first, just always doing that. Just a great, great personality, a great, great person who never has lost his perspective in a time when most men would have done so. He has made a lot of money. He's made a lot of people successful. He's been through some rocky times. He did the tough things that you have to do sometimes in communities, like be on the board of an organization that's got a long-time volunteer who's been running it for years, but they've got to be changed. You've got to make a personnel change. He can handle the unpleasant parts of leadership that are essential for the organization to grow, as well as anybody I've ever seen. Just a wonderful, wonderful person.
The last question, and it can be, Ty and I've been trying to get as much of the funny stories that nobody would know. If you think back over your last 30 or 40 years, there's got to be, whether it's about health care or roads or getting rid of somebody, there's got to be some good war stories that you would tell your grandchildren one day. You won't believe what happened when this issue came up, and here's how it rolled out. Got any of those you'd like to share with us?
That's one thing I didn't anticipate being asked.
If you want to be a little PG-13, that's okay.
Well, first thing, a few things come to mind. It's funny when you say something like that. But you remember Arthur Bacon, who was Max Bacon's father, is Max Bacon. Is passed away. The late Arthur Bacon, who was the current Max Bacon mayor of Smyrna's dad, was a member of the Chamber of Commerce, as was his son Max. And we did an outing at on a membership drive, which you were very familiar with. We did it at Six Flags. And we did it on a cold, kind of rainy night in the fall when it was getting a little colder, faster than we thought. We had barbecue, but they had the tables all lined up, and everybody was sitting in like a school cafeteria. And Arthur was big, old, rotund, deep, Santa Claus type of a red-bellied laugh. And we had this speaker that was up there speaking to the group, and everybody was sitting there, and Joe Mack Wilson and the mayor of Marietta was kidding Arthur, the mayor of Smyrna, about something, and they got into a fight. And Joe Mack Wilson said, "Arthur," and kind of swung around to make a point. Arthur flipped over to fake like he was falling, but he fell. And his bald head hit that concrete floor, and it sounded exactly like a watermelon hitting the concrete. I mean, you would have thought his brains would have been all, the sound went all over Six Flags. For 10 minutes, it was a dead silence. Everybody didn't know if he was dead or whatever. And that's not a funny story, but that's a true story, because it was when somebody pretended for a purpose to make a point and then fell through with it and made a real point with the back of his head. Talking about Joe Mack Wilson, he is kind of a character. We were in the legislature together for years. Joe Mack and I served together, and he was Gerald Horton was the most liberal member of the legislature. He was from Fulton County, and Joe Mack was one of the more conservative ones, although not as conservative as he needed to be necessarily. And he'd always give the liberal side hell about anything they did to help folks. And so when we were doing the appropriations bill, and Joe Mack was chairman of the Green Door Committee, which was a secret committee of 5 that decided where all the money in the state went, he was up in the well gave an outline of the appropriations bill, and got into the new program we were going to do in ophthalmology at the state hospital. And he started talking about how it was a great investment. And Horton, who was mad at Joe Mack for not giving Horton some money that he needed for Atlanta, made a comment kind of under his breath, but deep enough to where it could be heard around the room, about how Atlanta was never getting what it could get, and Cobb County was getting more than it should. I remember Joe Mack saying, "What you got against eye care, Horton? You against the poor people who can't see? You just want Atlanta to do things like that, and get everybody laughing and get them off their case." I can't think of an incident though. I know they're out there.
The story that I'm specifically thinking of, John Williams told us a story where he was having a barbecue. A senator came over, and that meant like 100 more people.
Oh no! I know that story. I'll tell you that story real quick.
No, we know that story. We want a story kind of in that.
In that vein. No, that's okay. Now you know the story.
Yeah.
I was the guy that got the senator was Barry Goldwater.
I thought that was the name I was thinking.
And
We had to get M&Ms and whiskey, right?
Yeah, and well, what happened was I told John, "Can we use your house? It's going to be the biggest thing the Republican Party's ever done out here. We're going to need a house as big as yours to do it. How many people do you think you have?" I said, "We might have 100." Well, we had 800. Cars were parked from Sandy Springs to John's house. Every 7-Eleven in the county sold out ice, all coming to our party. The 2 turkeys I cooked got eaten in 5 minutes. With these 2 bony carcasses sitting on the middle of the table. Barry Goldwater was coming to. They just voted on the Gulf of Tonkin resolutions, which was the biggest Vietnam War decision that kind of everything was history after that. So Goldwater had run for president, very prominent citizen. So he was coming to Cobb County to talk for Quincy Collins, who was going to run for Congress as a Republican. John was not my friend. I'd taken advantage of the friendship and said, "Well, can we use your house?" And we did. It started raining. You had all those big television trucks in front of the house with the satellite dishes, mud in the front yard, 800 people when it's supposed to be 200 people. In comes the state patrol with this bus behind it, and in the bus is Barry Goldwater, and Goldwater walks down the steps, gets on John's porch, and starts to talk, and talks for about an hour and 15 minutes. And still raining, nobody moving, everybody. And so it was just a big success, but it made the biggest mess you have ever seen anywhere. So when we were leaving that night, I said, "Now, John, I'm going to come over and help clean this up." He said, "No, you're not." He said, "You're going to stay over and help clean this up." So John Williams and I, mopping a broom pail, about 2 o'clock in the morning, started mopping up his house. We had to pump the septic tank out the next day because it got overloaded. It was the perfect, everything could go wrong, did go wrong, but it ended up being one of the funniest things you've ever seen. When you got the president of a big apartment company, the president of the chamber, and all these people down there on their hands and knees watching the floors. And Barry Goldwater, in the meantime, drank a 5th of scotch and enjoyed every minute of it.
When John told that story, he just started laughing. I mean, it's like all of a sudden the facts started coming into play, and
you start remembering.
About it,
you start having the visual of it too, because everybody was dodging the rain. Channel 5, Channel 2, everybody was out there. The neighbors were all madder than hell. People couldn't get. The roads were closed because people parking in the center of the road. Everybody wanted to see Barry Goldwater. It was country come to town.
Yeah. Well, it's a little after quarter.
Okay.
Quarter after. So, thank you.